When I talk about the Constitution. If you haven't done so already, I encourage you to get a copy of the Constitution. It's out front on the table there, along with a nice, your own tin of constitutional amendments available out front for you. We paid money for them. You should get them. So welcome to Constitution Day. My name is Steve Maceda. I'm the director of the Lou Fry Institute here at UCF over in the College of Sciences. Today we recognize and celebrate that most important document, which established for us our framework of government that we rely on to this day. Now, I'm not going to say that we don't have issues, I mean, look around, but there is a reason that this venerated document is the oldest active national constitution in the world. I would, of course, point out that my home state of Massachusetts has an older one, but, you know, I'll let that go. Of course, adopting the Constitution wasn't a slam dunk. The Federalists and the Anti-Federalists had differing visions of the nation and its government, as well as the goals and purposes of this new Constitution, crafted at a convention, was not supposed to do anything but revise the Articles of Confederation. The debate between Patrick Henry and James Madison at Virginia's ratifying convention summarizes at least some of the ideological divide that existed at our founding, particularly around the Bill of Rights, executive power, and what it meant to be the United States. Let's look at the words of Patrick Henry. I have the highest veneration for those gentlemen. But, sir, give me leave to demand, what right had they to say, we the people? My political curiosity, exclusive of my anxious solicitude for the public welfare, leads me to ask, who authorized them to speak the language of we the people instead of we the states? States are the characteristics and the soul of Confederation. If the states be not the agents of this compact, it must be one great consolidated national government of the people of all the states. Here is a resolution as radical as that which separated us from Great Britain. It is radical in this transition. Our rights and privileges are endangered, and the sovereignty of the states will be relinquished. And cannot we plainly see that this is actually the case? The rights of conscience, trial by jury, liberty of the press, all your immunities and franchises, all your pretensions to human rights and privileges are rendered insecure, if not lost, by this change, so loudly talked of by some, and inconsiderately by others. If we admit this consolidated government, it will be because we like a great, splendid one. Some way or other, we must be a great and mighty empire. We must have an army and a navy and a number of things. When the American spirit was in its youth, the language of America was different. Liberty, sir, then was the primary object. Then, of course, James Madison. This government is not completely consolidated, nor is it entirely federal. Who are the parties to it? The people, but not the people as composing one great body, but the people as composing 13 sovereignties. Were it, as the gentleman asserts, a consolidated government, the assent of a majority of the people will be sufficient for its establishment. And as the majority have adopted it already, the remaining states will be bound by the act of the majority, even if they unanimously rejected it. But, sir, no state is bound by it, as it is without its own consent. Should all the states adopt it, it will then be a government established by the 13 states of America, not through the intervention of the legislatures, but by the people at large. In this particular respect, the distinction between the existing and the proposed governments is very material. The existing system has been derived from the dependent derivative authority of the legislatures of the states, whereas this is derived from the superior power of the people. We the people, you know these words. You probably remember singing them along with Schoolhouse Rock. But we, the people, was at the heart of the ratification debates, both during the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia, where Patrick Henry is sometimes said to have said he smelt a rat that reeked of monarchy, or Alexander Hamilton, in his mind they were both, or at state ratifying conventions, where local politics was writ large. This afternoon, we're joined by a number of guest speakers. We have John Sacker here, also with David Head, both professors of history, here at UCF, Jeffrey Swartz of the Cooley Law School, Christopher Heath, who is adjunct professor of media law at UCF, and Emily Pontiff, who brings to us her legislative experience working as a legislative aide. And to discuss these ratification debates and what they mean today, I don't know about you, but I'm excited. So friends, let's go ahead and talk about the Constitution. Now, as we begin, I'm going to give you guys about 3 to 5 minutes to sort of give your initial thoughts on the topic of the Constitution and the ratification debates, and where we are today, really when it comes to this idea of what the Constitution means to us and how it reflects what came before. So let's start here. And please be sure to introduce yourself.
Hello? There we go. Okay, all right. I'm Jeffrey Swartz. I'm a former professor of constitutional law and criminal procedure from Cooley Law School. Former prosecutor, defense attorney, appellate judge, appellate lawyer, and then a professor. I'm just a guy. The Constitution, I think that what we have to talk about is that the framers who originally put together the Constitution did not see it as a document that was supposed to enshrine rights. The people who wrote it looked at it as basically being a way of creating an economic and military treaty, for lack of a better word, among 13 disparate states, or countries, because states were known as countries. That's why we called them states initially. One has to look at the Articles of Confederation and the conditions under which this loose tie had created too many controversies. And it was just literally bad for business. The idea that they each had their own money. They charged tariffs among themselves. And it was very bad for business. It is not a coincidence that people like Jefferson and Adams were out of the country when we formulated the Constitution. The fact that Hancock showed up was one thing. Patrick Henry did not show up initially because the people that were there, mostly, did not care about enshrining rights. They thought they were like Englishmen. They did not have to be placed in writing, except for they were placed in writing in England, and it was called the Magna Carta. So that's the way we started it. The original text, before the first 12 amendments were proposed, there were 12. Only 10 of them were ratified, but there were initially 12, okay? Added that because they couldn't get the votes necessary to ratify the Constitution initially. And those amendments, if you ever get to Washington and you go to the archives, you will see there were actually 16 or 17 of them that were consolidated into the 8 or 9 that we all know about. So the history of the Constitution is important, and why we're where we are is a secondary issue.
John Satcher from the History Department. I had sent you some slides. Are they in there or no? Go to the next. Is there a next slide? If there's not, that's no worry. Yes. Okay, maybe not. Okay, no worries. My other piece of housekeeping is if you're in one of my classes and doing extra credit, just take a selfie of yourself somewhere in this room and we'll count that for extra credit. Mine is not working, but this is working better. I really don't think I need a microphone, but we'll go ahead. So you've given a historian 5 minutes to talk. I'll try to keep it at 10. No. Okay. So September 17th, 1787. What are we here to celebrate? What happened on September 17th, 1787? I think you can look at two views of what happened that day. One, of course, is that we signed the document that really has become probably really the true birth of the United States today. And we think about July 4th being the birthday of the United States, but July 4th, the Declaration of Independence establishes an independent United States, but doesn't really establish the government which we stand for. So instead, on September 17th, 1787, 242 years ago from today, we established a government that has really persisted with minimal amendments, 27 amendments over the last 242 years. It's an inspiration for the rest of the world, an inspiration for us here today. So sort of that's one way to look at what happened on September 17th, 1787. There's another way to look at it. You could look at it that 39 men representing 11 states plus Alexander Hamilton, so not even all 13 were really represented there, signed a document that was illegal. They had been selected to amend the Articles of Confederation. Instead, they wrote a brand new document. What else were they supposed to do? To amend the Articles of Confederation, all 13 states unanimously needed to ratify it. Well, they decided, no, not 13. They knew Rhode Island wasn't going to do it. So they decided only 9 needed to ratify it. So 39 guys out of the 55 that showed up, issue a document to the people of the United States. They've been meeting in secret all summer. Nobody had been live streaming it. Nobody had been tweeting from there. Nobody knew what the document was. Send it out. They knew the state legislatures wouldn't like it. So they instead said special conventions had to ratify this document. Special conventions solely meant for that purpose. So really, you could argue what they did was try to illegally usurp the government of the United States. Now, the advantage of being a historian, one of the advantages and disadvantages, we have hindsight. So we can actually look at this either way. I hope most of us choose to look at it the first way, the way that it is one of the great political documents in world history. But you could certainly look at it if you're in the United States in October of 1787, you're looking at a document that is semi-illegally produced, a document which, as my predecessor said, has no guarantee of rights. There is no Bill of Rights. There are no rights guaranteed to the people of the United States. So they send this document out to the ratification conventions. So the question posed at the start, to ratify or not ratify, you can start to see why some people consider not ratifying a viable option. A document illegally produced, a document that does not guarantee people's rights. Well, some states quickly ratified it for various reasons. Small states tend to like the idea of the US Senate, that everybody has equal representation in it. Certain states like the fact that there might be an army that can protect their borders. But you're really waiting for the 9th state to ratify it. In fact, so nothing really happens on September 17, 1787. Until the 9th state ratifies it, the next year, New Hampshire, it really hasn't come into play. And then even after that, you have votes in Virginia and New York, Massachusetts, the key states. All of those votes are very close. 30 to 27, 178 to 160 something. I mean, this went to the conventions, and really that's where the people got to speak, and they got to decide whether or not to ratify this document. So you might think, from your perspective, what would you do in 1787 had this document been put forward in front of you?
Hello, my name is Emily Pontiff, and I think my first statement needs to be I am not a constitutional expert. And I would guess most of you out in this crowd aren't either. And I think that's exactly why Mike Kepner actually asked me to be on the stage today with such incredible minds that have spent their lives dedicated to studying the Constitution. What I am somebody who at 17 years old, I started on Capitol Hill as a Senate page. They are the youngest employees of the United States government, and their job is quite literally to sit on the floor of the Senate and listen day in and day out for the entire time that the Senate is in session, and ensure that small things like the rostrum being set up or the desks being set up or the amendments being filed are done. I then went on and I held 6 internships in the U.S. House of Representatives. I was a ghostwriter for the Department of Defense. And then I came back to Florida and I worked in the judicial branch for the state of Florida. I was a regional conflict counsel legal assistant for the 5th District over in Castleberry. And then I went back to Capitol Hill because I couldn't get enough of it. And now I'm in the private defense sector doing defense work and staying very, very close to my roots in the United States government. And where I think my feelings on the Constitution lie is I was raised very, very lucky in a family that really valued civic education. So from a very young age, and I'm looking at my brother, 2 years younger than me, sitting in the front row, my brother and I were given pocketbook constitutions, and we were encouraged to read it. We were encouraged to ask our parents questions about it, and our parents didn't give their opinions on the Constitution. They just wanted us to ask, and they taught us the facts. And it led to both of us just being completely enamored with this idea of a document being written over 200 years ago and still having such relevance in our lives and having such relevance in the United States government. And so as I was taking classes at UCF, and I was a legal studies minor here, I really fell in love with the 6th Amendment to the Constitution, which guarantees the right to an attorney. And so I went and I became a legal assistant for the defense, and I felt really strongly about giving those who may not have the opportunity to go and hire this really fancy defense attorney an ability to be represented in court. And you see a lot of really interesting cases come out of people that got stuck in some sticky situations and needed some help, and offering them that type of assistance. And then going back to Capitol Hill, I watched through 3 different administrations. I started during the Obama administration, went into the first Trump administration, and I kept working through the first year and a half of the Biden administration. Seeing the political climate change the way that it did, and the way that people started to cling to the Constitution to support their values. And something that I think is really important that the first two gentlemen mentioned is that rights are not guaranteed to us in the Constitution. It was something that was thought of later. It was something that were brought to us by amendments. And it's really important, I think, to look at the fact that amendments are not easy to come by. We were having a discussion before this, and some of us don't even think that the Constitution will ever be amended again. But I think it's very important for students like yourselves to familiarize yourself with this document, because I think part of where our country suffers today is not being familiar with these types of documentation. And when we look at the core argument of would you or would you not ratify the Constitution today, I think for me, my answer is a little bit more simple than the first two gentlemen's. I'm the only woman sitting up here, and the original Constitution did not protect my right to vote. It also did not protect people of color's right to vote. And so it is not a perfect document. However, they eventually were able to amend that so that it could support my right to vote. But when I look at it right now, as I sit here on this stage, I can appreciate that an imperfect document is still so relevant in my life, while also recognizing that things needed to change down the road, and appreciating that our forefathers realized that things would need to change down the road.
Good afternoon, everyone. That's working? All right, thank you very well. I overdid it, right? So thank you, everyone, for coming out here this afternoon. My name is David Head, and I am from the history department. And one of the things I think you'll notice in our discussion today that will emerge is the different perspectives that people from different backgrounds, different expertise will have on the Constitution. We have people from a legal perspective, from a political science perspective, and it's going to be a little different from what historians understand. None of us is necessarily right. I have to put in that caveat, okay? Because we're really right, John? Yes, okay. But there are two values. There are two values that historians really emphasize that I want to emphasize for you today. Number one is context. So we begin by trying to understand the context in which a particular action happens, all the circumstances surrounding it, the way people think, especially, the mentality of the time. That doesn't mean that we end solely with context, but the first step is to understand people on their own terms and the circumstances in which they acted. We can be in conversation with them over time, but to understand their time comes first. The other value that historians operate from is the value of contingency. The idea that the way events happened is not the way they had to happen, that there's very little that is preordained about the way that life works out. Both of those considerations, I think, are important when we look back at an event that is so well known and so well documented and so often celebrated as the creation of the Constitution, because it's difficult to put ourselves back into that moment in the 1780s. The context of that moment was one of crisis of the nation's finances coming out of the American Revolution, a crisis of governance. Who is really in charge? The states, the people, somebody else? How does that all fit together? The preceding years in the 1780s, the country had just kind of lurched from one crisis to another crisis with no satisfactory resolution in sight. And it was foremost in many of the framers' minds, but also other people, how long can this go on? We can't simply go from crisis to crisis. Will the whole project collapse? And if it collapses, does that mean the American Revolution was fought for nothing? So that's the context to keep in mind. I was very happy to see that we're talking about ratification, because that's a process of the Constitution that's often overlooked. We will have a big celebration in 2027 or 30, whenever the 250th anniversary is. I can't do math live on stage. Whenever that comes, we're going to have that one. We're not going to probably have a celebration of the ratification, because that happened over time, right? We like one date that's a holiday. But that's very important because we see the contingency. The Constitution, as it was written and agreed to in September of 1787, was up for grabs in the period afterwards. And it was never clear until it was clear that it was going to go into effect. I'll leave you with one of the fascinating tidbits I picked up in the Constitution class that I took in grad school from my professor, Dick Ellis. If you know the courts system, you may have read his work. And I never knew this before, he pointed out that there were 2 states that didn't ratify the Constitution before the Constitution went into effect. So it went into effect without 2 of them. One was North Carolina, okay, and the other was Rhode Island. North Carolina came around, Rhode Island didn't. And Washington had to threaten the use of military force to get them to join the country. He went on a tour of the various different states. He skipped Rhode Island because, as he said, that was foreign territory. He was going to dignify them with a visit from the new president. So that gives you a sense of the contingency of all of this, and that it didn't need to work out the way it did. Thank you. I look forward to our conversation today. Thank you.
I'll attempt to try this microphone. Audible to everyone? Fantastic. I am Christopher Heath. I teach media law here at the university. I have one of my students here. Hi, Allison. Thank you for coming. In addition to that, I have been a paid journalist for 25 plus years. I've been fortunate enough in my career as a journalist to have been a war correspondent, interviewed 3 presidents, and interviewed just about every Secretary of State from Madeleine Albright to our current Secretary of State, Marco Rubio. In between all of that, I, again, teach media law here. And Allison's heard this before, because on the first day of class, I begin with a great throat clearing. And we talk about the doors at the Supreme Court. And if you've ever been to the United States Supreme Court, there are 8 fantastic panels up there. And they trace law from antiquity to, well, Marbury versus Madison, which for those of us who care about judicial review is a big deal. But you start with the sword of Achilles, and it's this idea that we can settle disputes by words and ideas. And this is really what the Constitution Convention was about. Ideas and words. We're going to bring together a disparate nation, which again is at this time just states, and bring in something better out of this. Now, the table stakes of the day were that the Articles of Confederation weren't working, so we will endeavor to find that more perfect union. And when you go back, and I think like many who read the Constitution growing up and has had to reread it over the years, I've also gone back and read the Federalist Papers several times. Not all of them, because they're a little, no offense, dense, tough to get through, boring. Fair enough. I never took time to read the anti-Federalist Papers, for probably the same reason nobody buys the Buffalo Bills book to winning Super Bowls. You don't want to read the side that didn't come out on top. But I've gone back, in especially preparation for today, and reread some of those arguments. And they make compelling cases, which I think we also have to draw out here today, for why they were concerned with this new government that was emerging from Philadelphia, for what kind of powers would be. Would faction come against faction? Would popular will triumph over everything? And would the 3 different branches, Article 1, Article 2, and Article 3, all stand up against each other? Or would one of them eventually get overwhelmed by the other 2? And I think if we start to look at where we are today, I don't want to get too into the weeds on that, we look at some of these different branches and say, are they functioning the way that the Founding Fathers thought? And I think that that's a worthy conversation as well as we move on for today. So glad to be here.
Everybody hear me? Yeah, fantastic. All right. I appreciate the introductory comments. You guys made some interesting points. I will just say that speaking as a Massachusetts boy, nobody wants to go to Rhode Island anyway, so I can understand Washington's perspective. I have a bunch of questions for us to really think about, but I'm going to start with a somewhat easy one. Are there modern parallels, in your view, to the Federalist versus Anti-Federalist debate today? And feel free, whoever wants to answer first, and don't feel like you have to answer.
Are we working? Yeah, okay. Yeah, I think there are. The people that we refer to as Federalists are much like the Federalist Society that we see today. And that is that they are against the expansion of federal power. They are against the rights that have been interpreted, not the ones that are actually written, but how they've been interpreted. And Hamilton was not in favor, and many of the people who voted for the Constitution were not in favor of enshrining rights. The only reason why some of these rights, or all of our rights, were enshrined is because without them, there would not be a country. They would have never gotten the votes that they needed for many of the states that they did. We are seeing this debate today. We are seeing a Supreme Court, and I am a member of the Supreme Court, so I've been there a couple of times, not the court itself, but of its bar. I will tell you that we have a Supreme Court now that is intent on setting aside a lot of precedent, that expanded our rights starting in the 60s, long before many of your parents were even born. I was born then, but I'm old. The truth of the matter is that we're seeing that debate today. The destruction of the federal government bureaucracy is part of that federalist, anti-federalist thought process. The anti-federalists believed in expanding and they were mainly at the time libertarians who were concerned about the idea that the federal government would expand too large and take away their rights. So that's what we're seeing right now, and I think that people are starting to pick sides. And one party, which was at one time very much in favor of the Constitution and everybody's rights, has now become the party that wants to pull back on a lot of that. It is your generation that's going to have to live with what happens today. And that's the easiest way to put it. So, but yeah, that debate is raging today and has raged, honestly, throughout the entirety of the Constitution. We fought a civil war over those type of things. So that's where we are today.
I would say if you were to go and bring back one of the founding fathers and bring them today and say, here are the three different parts, Article 1, Article 2, Article 3, each of the branches, which one looks the most like what you thought it would look like? I would argue the judiciary is the one of the three that looks the most like they envisioned back in 1787. I think of the three. There was a concern among some of the founding fathers that what you would eventually end up with is a, for lack of a better term, imperial presidency, a presidency that consumes power and gathers more unto it, and a legislative branch that is impotent, doesn't do anything. We are on track now to have a Congress that will pass fewer laws than any Congress before. And that says something because the ones before them recently didn't do a lot. You can name a post office, but real legislation is just not passing. And we've seen increasingly the Article 2 branch gathering more power to it, governing through executive orders that are a papal bull from one administration to the next and then are erased just as quickly. So I think if you were to look at the three, is the judiciary perfect? No. Is it the one that at least right now is closest to what the founders envisioned? I would have to argue yes.
In regards to the question of whether the anti-federalist, federalist debate continues today, I think in one sense it does. We are still struggling with the best way to run a country where the people, you all, are sovereign in this country. The anti-federalist, federalist debate was a fear of there's too much power at the central government level. I think, and again, as my predecessor here said, it's like the idea that the federal government continues, and both of you said, continues to encroach on power with executive orders. In fact, I think the federal government has more power than the Federalists' wild imagination would have had in 1787. And that's the federal government's side. I think so. The idea, if the fear of the federal government is the federal government would continue to increase in power, how do you have a country that is where the people are sovereign and the federal government seems to have more and more power, and how do you protect your rights in that country? I think those are questions that are still relevant today. Those were the questions that they were struggling with in 1787. Do we need a Bill of Rights? How much power should a president have? I mean, those were two of the biggest concerns in 1787, 1788, 1789. I'd imagine for many of you, those are similar concerns today. And so I think what we've done really over the 242 years since the Constitution was signed is really debate those issues. And I think we will continue to debate those issues.
To, I guess, push back a little bit on the notion that the Constitution does not protect rights as it was originally written. So the Constitution without a Bill of Rights does not protect rights. And I think that's going too far. The framers who did not want to have a Bill of Rights, the reason they didn't want to have a Bill of Rights is because they were afraid of what would happen if you start writing down what rights you have, right? If you write down you have a right to free speech or to the gun ownership or assemble or whatever it is, well, does that imply that rights that are not on the list are therefore not protected? And they thought that if we start writing them down, that's going to open a can of worms that we don't want to open. So I think that's what they were trying to do. The idea rights were supposed to be protected, but they didn't want to start making explicit for fear of leaving something out. But as we talked about, some of the places in Virginia, New York, and especially the two largest population states, they said, no, we want it written down. Madison's like, are you sure? Like, yes, write it down. And so they were able to reach an agreement that once this is in place, then Congress went right to writing amendments to the Constitution because there's some people who wanted those rights written down. That was the nature of the debate. Should the rights be written down or not? The debate was not, do we have these rights or not? So it's about how to best protect them. So I think that comes out. I mean, even things like, this is where my future Senate campaign may get derailed if you take this out of context. Okay? So you're all my witnesses, not to take this out of context. So there were women who voted in the early republic in New Jersey for a number of years. So the Constitution is silent on whether women must be allowed to vote or their vote can be suppressed. So it would have been possible to have women voting. The Constitution doesn't decide that one way or the other. It was the states left in their hands. The later amendment says, no, states, you can't decide not to allow women to vote. So I'd put a lid on that. But it could have, again, history could have worked out differently under the rules that the Constitution had established.
All right, well, it's always good to have at least a little bit of back and forth and discussion and debate in a panel, so I appreciate that somebody said I disagree with somebody else. Let's go to a nice, easy question. Would today's political climate produce the same Constitution?
That's I think it's a fairly easy question. It would not, if for only one reason, and I'll go to another subject that gives you the idea of that. We have 27 amendments to our Constitution. There have been, I think, 32 that have been proposed. 5 were not ratified. Ratification takes 3/4 of the states. That, I don't believe in today's political climate, could ever happen. We take a look at the voting map, and you look at the middle of the country, and it is all red. And you take a look at the coasts, and it's all blue. And and that division you could never pass a constitution like this. You could never pass a constitution. We can't even amend this Constitution. I argue to you there will never, ever be another amendment to the United States Constitution unless there is such a catastrophe that occurs that would necessitate it. It takes those type of catastrophes to amend this Constitution, even over the 5, what I call eras that are spelled out in this wonderful book that I have here. By the way, it's not my book. And basically, we had the founding era. We had the Reconstruction era. We had the Civil Rights era. We had, I forgot what the 5th one is. And we had another. We've had 5. They're just skipping my brain at this point. We need that type of catastrophe. The problem is, if you look at both sides, could one propose a constitution that the other would readily accept? And I don't think that the answer to that question is yes. So could we write a constitution? Would this constitution pass? No, I don't think so.
All right. So I agree that the answer is no. I disagree that it is more about where the voter map lies and more about where the mentality of a country, where we're at as a country right now. And what I mean by that is that I think we've reached such a point of polarization and we have such an issue with tribalism that the idea of reaching across the aisle in order to get something accomplished has almost completely become a lost art. And I blame a lot of that on social media. And the reason why I say that is because when I started working on Capitol Hill, you would walk into most any office and they would have two things on the TVs. They'd have C-SPAN running so that you could watch the floor and you could watch whatever was going on the floor. And then you would have a news station on. And most offices would have a news station on that was corresponding to the party that they were aligned with. And so Democratic offices would typically have MSNBC or CNN. Republican offices would typically have Fox. And when you would sit there and you would listen to that all day long, it's kind of just drumming in the same rhetoric and you're not getting any sort of opposing opinion. And the other thing that would happen is you would watch general session. And what general session is where you can go out and you can give a speech on anything. You could give a speech on why red is the best color in the world, or why blue is the best color in the world, or why you think that there should be a stream named after your great uncle. And it was always very, very obvious when you would see a congressperson get up on during general session and they were looking for their staff to clip a 30-second video to post on their social media channel. And what they're looking for is they're looking to rile up their base and rile up the opposing bases. And where I think we have fallen into a dangerous spot as a country is we are not willing a lot of times to accept that there is an act of compromise that must be had in order to reach a good general ground to push forward legislation. And it was so obvious when my boss, who is now the current chair of appropriations, would get up and speak. And at the time, he was a rules committee chairman, and they literally run when votes go on the floor. They run that process. He would get up and he would say to his counterpart in the other party, he would say, "My friend across the aisle." And what was the reaction inside of the office when he would say that? We would all brace ourselves. And we would brace ourselves because we knew that those phones that I was in charge of answering from constituents would start to go off the hook of people saying, why is he friends with that other party? They aren't his friends. They're against him. And so when that is the general reaction of the American public who is calling their congressperson to not even consider somebody from the other side a friend, I think that is where you lose hope of passing a constitution in today's society. And I think it's sad because I think behind the scenes conversations that I would listen to as a staffer and as an aide who would go with my congressman to talk to other congressmen, there is a desire to have that open door and have that type of compromise, but they're so afraid of what will happen the moment that it hits the media, and they are so afraid of how quickly that will get blown out of proportion and what their voter base will do, that they shrink away from it and they vote along party lines only. And I think that is where our issue lies in getting a constitution passed today.
Agree with my colleagues here that the answer is no, we cannot get a new constitution written today. But I would like to be a little bit more optimistic about that. No, but part of the reason no is we don't need to. One of the great features, one of the reasons we're here on September 17th is the brilliance of the Constitution we have. It has managed to survive 242 years. It has managed to survive a civil war. It has managed, to survive changing really who we consider the people who are part of the Constitution with only 27 amendments. And you say, okay, we keep saying 27 amendments, whatever it's going to be. Of course, that's just the way it is. Well, let's look at a state. Florida. How many constitutions has Florida had? 5 or 6, I think, depending on who you count it. We're currently living under the 1968 Constitution of Florida. How many amendments has the 1968 Constitution of Florida had? According to Ballotpedia, 146. And that's, you have to almost guess, because we pass legislation as amendments and then we refuse to pass them. But we're so, you think about it, we as a state have constantly changed our rules, and we've tried to do these things and make them better. The beauty of this is we don't need a constitution, we don't need a new constitution. So I agree that we would not have a new constitution. It would be very hard to get the two sides to agree on just about anything at this point. But the beauty of what the framers put together in September of 1787 is that it can survive really a lot of political divisiveness in this country.
I want to follow up with that, and I think it's kind of important. When you look at our Constitution, it has to be interpreted. They left the difference between the two sides right now, and one of the differences is the Constitution a living and breathing document? Is it a document that was left the way it was so that the people or its representatives or even the courts could determine what it meant? Or is it strictly the textualists who say, if it wasn't written in the Constitution, or if it was amended, we only look at the words and the people and the founders who wrote those amendments, and people who write amendments are now called founders. Do we read the words for what the dictionary says those words mean? Or do we look beyond it into the clauses and what those clauses mean? And we lived through an era, right around the time your parents might have been born, that we interpret through the 60s and early 70s, we interpreted the Constitution to expand the rights to those who were entitled to them and what they meant. And the battle now is, does it say what it says, or does it say what it says to be interpreted for the times that we live in? And I think that's a major difference between the two sides right now, and something that's important to know about the Constitution. Where do you stand? Do you think it really needs to be amended, or can it be interpreted? And that's a big issue.
All right, so let's talk about media. Certainly, media plays a huge role in public perception. Even going back in our own history, election of 1800 was very much a media election. And it was a brutal media election. If you're not familiar with the election of 1800, I encourage you to check it out. Some really interesting language being used in the newspapers about the other side. You know, sometimes we put the founders on a pedestal. The founders dealt with some of the similar issues we do today. That being said, let's start with our media specialist at the end of the table. How do media and public perception, in your view, really shape our understanding of both the founders and the framers and constitutional understanding today?
Media does a terrible job explaining the Constitution to people. I mean, we just do. It's not, you know, we'll bring on an attorney, we'll bring on a constitutional scholar maybe to talk about it, but really getting into the minutia of it, it just doesn't lend itself well to these lofty debates and understanding these, you know, widespread ideas. How many of you have heard of the Bruin decision? Relatively recent Supreme Court decision. Hands up. Firearms dealt with the Second Amendment. Don't put your hand up. From the Bruin decision, we get text, history, and tradition, a new way to interpret the Constitution and what it all means, and what was Jefferson thinking, and what was Hamilton thinking with the Federalist Papers, and should we look at them as original sources, and what was the legislature in Kentucky thinking in the 1800s. That's relatively new school of thought, and most of you have never heard of it. Why? Well, we do a bad job telling you these things. We do an even worse job, I think, explaining when a decision has been made by the Supreme Court, or better yet, when the Supreme Court has let a lower court decision stand while they're waiting for oral argument. I see headlines all the time that say John Roberts sides with the Trump administration, and I'm like, no, he didn't. He simply is allowing this to go forward for oral argument. We're not even there yet. But he's going to, you know, let the lower court decision stand, or he's going to postpone the lower court decision. We do a very bad job explaining it to the public. Now, is it the media's job to explain it to the public? I would argue partially yes. Is it academia's job to explain it to the public? I would argue yes. Is it your job to go out and read and learn? And I don't mean Google searching or Chat GPTing your way to the answer that you wanted to find. I mean reading the text. As they said of Madison and Jefferson, imbibing it. It's your job. Democracy is not a spectator sport. It is your job. Now, the media, again, we're not perfect. But if you're relying on us to be your professor, to be your teacher, to be the one who explains these important decisions to you, we are going to end up in a worse place than we currently are. And on that note of crushing morosity.
I just want to follow quickly because I think there's something you hit on that could be promising. Of course, media loves conflict, right? Because conflict makes people agitated, and agitated people cannot look away from whatever it is that they're watching. But you mentioned there needs to be understanding of the process. Right? So what I mean, only an expert or someone really devoted to this stuff knows what the process is of what you said. When the court grants the thing to move forward, that doesn't mean they agree with the underlying reasoning. It's just sufficient to move forward, right? I don't really know anything about that. All you hear is this is a win for who and who. So I think there is an opportunity to focus more on process and how what's actually going on. Is that really a conflict of values kind of question? Is it a political horse race kind of question? Who's winning, who's losing? Or is it simply, this is what's happening and this is the process of why it's happening? That could be an opportunity to inform people without inflaming, if that's desirable.
My concern lies less in the information of the process, although I agree that is something that I would love to see more of, because I think so many people are woefully uneducated in that. I think my bigger issue recently has become, and I think this is an interesting conversation coming off of the heels of some comments made yesterday, when you have the Attorney General of the United States getting on and saying that they are going to persecute anybody who has hate speech towards Charlie Kirk, who was obviously very sadly killed in a politically motivated assassination last week. I think my issue there is I turned on 3 different news stations to listen about Pam Bondi's comments. And each news station had a different set of commentary. And I know most of our citizens are not getting their news from 3 different media sources. They're getting it from one. And so I think where my issue more lies is that there's a lot of interpretations of the Constitution being presented as fact in the media. And I think that becomes really dangerous really quickly. Because I think if somebody hears that, and this is somebody who maybe really trusts the news, and they really think that whatever comes out of these anchors or these specialist mouths are fact, and if they hear that really aggressive spin on things, and then they go and they start telling their families about it, then I think that's where my biggest issue with the Constitution and the media lies right now. I think that it's starting to tread into some dangerous waters where we're presenting our feelings as hard and true facts.
Jump in real quick, and I'll let you have the mic 1 second. How many of you heard when President Trump signed the executive order banning flag burning? Hands up, everyone, yes, we heard of that. So that means Texas v. Johnson's gone, right? No, it doesn't. And if you actually stopped, and this is where my media, we do a bad job. If you actually stopped and read the executive order, it never got rid of flag burning. It never overturned Texas v. Johnson. That couldn't have happened anyway from an executive order. If you actually read it, which nobody did, and when I say nobody, I don't just mean the public writ large, I mean nobody in the media stopped to read the damn thing. It criminalized activities relatively adjacent to flag burning. So if you're burning a flag and you burn your neighbor's house down at the same time, they can get you for that, but they're getting you for arson either way. They're not getting you for flag burning, which is still protected speech. If you're burning somebody else's flag, you've stolen their flag. That's still going to be a crime, whether you're burning the American flag or the Philadelphia Eagles flag, which I think we should burn. That's another thing. Anyway.
As someone who works in the media a little bit, I do some talking head work for CNN, News Nation, and some of the other places. It's frustrating for me to find myself stuck into a 5 or 6 minute segment with someone else who's there, and you don't get asked the question to say the things that need to be said. I agree that most people today get their news from whatever silo they're in. Okay? If you are watching Fox, you are watching Fox, you're watching One America. If you're watching MSNBC, the only other place you're going to go is to CNN. And please watch it when I'm there. But the truth of the matter is that people won't watch the opposing point of view. And when they do, they comment negatively towards what they hear instead of absorbing what's being said. The segments are short, the things that are said are condensed. It's a very difficult situation for those of us who are on it who really want to say what has to be said, because people won't listen. They don't want to get down into the weeds, and that's the problem.
First of all, if you get 5 to 6 minutes, that's pretty good. It's the minute and a half. Yeah. Yes. I'm gonna be the optimist again. I guess that's my role on the panel here. I think I agree with what a lot has been said here. People do tend to get their news in silos, but if you think about the media compared to the media when I grew up or media before I was born, you have access to an incredible amount of information, much more so than any of us would have ever had access to. If the gentleman on the end mentions a Supreme Court decision and you have no idea what he's talking about, it will take you no time at all to discover what he's talking about. You do not have to go to a library and research a book or talk to a reference librarian. You could literally look at it while you're staring at it. So really the issue is the media now means such a broader term than it ever did before. So then the question is, are you moving outside of your silo? Are you looking for different points of view? And the other question is, are you critically analyzing what you read? Or hopefully in what you read is more than 2 or 3 sentences on something. So I think if you do that, then we have a situation where the media is giving you a lot more information than any of us ever had. So I choose to look at that. Maybe it's in the broader scope, the media is doing an okay job.
Really appreciate the perspectives you folks really put on the media there. Incidentally, if you are looking for good resources to learn about current events, such as the Texas v. Johnson decision, the Lou Fry Institute puts out a resource every week called Civics in Real Life, where we connect current events to civic concepts and ideas. And we did read the executive order relating to Texas v. Johnson, and we did put it out there that said this is not banning flag burning, it's banning everything, it's punishing everything around flag burning. So looking for a good resource, we have that available for you. We only have the room till 1:30, otherwise we could be going all day. So one last question I'd like you folks to really consider for our fine audience here. And it's this: what lessons from 1787 and the ratification debates and ultimately the adoption of the Constitution really, what should we take? What lessons should we take from 1787?
Everybody's staring out there and they're not hearing me. I think if we look, we can get answers to a lot of our questions. I think that we've learned that if we take lessons from 1787, we think as a country. My parents taught me that what's good for the country is good for me. Not what's good for me is good for me. I'm one of those people I'm a baby boomer. Okay, boomer. And I will tell you that if I had to point to a generation who is responsible and started to slide down to where we are right now, it's my generation. We got greedy. We didn't pay it forward. We tried to lower our taxes because it was better for us. We sent our kids to private schools, didn't care what happened to the public schools. And that affected all of you. Everybody sitting in this room. We have to get back to the lesson, which was all for one and one for all. And what's good for the country is good for me, simply put.
Well, of course, the lesson that we're supposed to learn is you should take more history classes, right, David? That's yes. You need to understand this better by taking more history classes. But I think also in terms of we're going back to the founding fathers, it's this, and kind of what Emily talked about earlier, it's the idea of this compromise, reaching across the aisle, that at some point a problem needs to be solved, and simply banging our head against the wall or insisting that our opponents bang their head against the wall does not solve a problem. At some point, if something needs to be done, you need to reach across the aisle, listen to the other people, and come up with a solution. At some point, it's not simply pointing out problems, it is coming up with solutions. And I think that's what the founders did. It turned out great. It wasn't perfect. I don't think people thought it was perfect in 1787, but the idea is you have to move forward with compromise, and again, looking for the spirit of the country over the spirit of the individual.
Yep. So my big one was going to be compromise. I think it's very obvious that's where I feel very strongly after all my points today. And I think the other one is really to be unafraid to blaze forward. I think I've spoken a lot about how there's so much issue right now with just voting alongside with your party. And even in some of those internal discussions that I heard, I knew that there were representatives that were voting alongside their party that didn't believe in what they were voting in, but they were being pressured into voting that way so that they weren't ostracized from their party and they weren't lambasted in the media. And I believe it was you that mentioned in the very beginning that we could look at the Constitution as this thing that was done almost illegally, and it was done kind of in the dead of night from a group of people who saw that the Articles of Confederation were failing, and they saw that something needed to be done, or this revolution was going to be for naught, and they just went forward and they did it. And I think we could use some of that today. I think we could really use some individuals that really feel strongly about something and push forward. And that's where I really hope my generation, as I sit here 27, I think I'm probably on the verge of inside of your generation. But I would really like to see where my generation and your generation takes up those reins and becomes unafraid to be criticized for the sake of bettering the country.
I want to echo some of the sentiments so far, especially when it comes to stability, right? There's a lot of value in having a stable system and a stable culture that surrounds a particular political arrangement. And it's easy to say, well, I want something different. That's fine, except what is that different thing? That's the real question. Compared to what is always the most important question. And then finally, I like to appreciate unintended consequences or unforeseen results. If there were betting markets in this kind of thing 200 some years ago, like there is today all over TV, you'd probably put money on the Constitution failing, because the two previous forms of government had failed. The Articles of Confederation, the British system of governance, right, which is once the most stable thing in the world. So why is the third time going to be the charm? And it turns out it was, in part because of what was established at the beginning. They got a lot of the plan right, but also because of innumerable decisions by millions of people committed to making that system persist into the future. So that's perhaps something that could be heartening for us, is that you have the beginning, but it's also the maintenance that it takes along the way, and that's maintenance that is up to and in the hands of everyone.
Madison said something along the lines of learning and liberty lean on each other. The fact that you're here, not just at the university, but in this room, learning. It feeds into what I said earlier about it's not a spectator sport. We need to educate ourselves. We need to learn about our government, state government, city government. Oh man, how many TV cameras are in Congress? Like, I mean, up there at Capitol Hill. 10,000, maybe? How many do you think are up in Tallahassee for a legislative session? Good day, maybe 2, maybe 3. How many do you think are in the Mount Dora City Council meeting? Maybe 1 live stream. The over-under's 1. I'm taking the under. You need to be engaged. And we focus on DC and we focus on maybe Tallahassee, but we need to be engaged everywhere, from your planning and zoning meeting all the way up. And I think when we think back to 1787, I would say this: humility. if that is the one lesson you take from what happened in Philadelphia, or what you take from today, it is humility. Did the founding fathers have it all figured out? No, they wrote a document that could be amended. They maybe didn't envision the amendments right away, but it could be. The process was there, and we've done it subsequently since then. Maybe we don't do it again, but it was done. But they didn't know everything. And I think for those of us that are now in the public realm, a level of humility would go a long way. You don't know as much today as you will tomorrow. And don't be so set in your beliefs that you are 100% right. It's always worth establishing first principles. It's always worth figuring out, why do I believe what I believe? And if you take that with a grain of humility and say, I may not know everything, I need to hear that argument. If nothing else, it will bolster my opinion and where I stand. You'll come a long way and possibly improve the country.
Thank you very much, everybody, for your sort of final thoughts there. Now, we want to respect the audience. We want to give you some time for Q&A. So we're going to take about 10 minutes for Q&A. Do we have a microphone out there? Do you need to use mine? All right, yeah. All right. So let's go ahead and, again, please respect each other, respect the panel, and respect yourself in the questions that you are asking here. So please raise your hand and feel free to inquire. You're not allowed to ask your sister.
She couldn't answer this one anyways. So my question's actually coming to you from the point of view of a social science educator. We work a lot inside of civic education and a lot inside of the Constitution, using it to create more civic-minded citizens when they come into the real world. So how do you think that a better understanding of the Constitution will create more civic-minded students that are coming into the real world from both a high school and college standpoint? Like, how much more do you think that we need to be educating these students that are coming out into it?
There we go. Again, from the vantage point of being the oldest guy sitting here, and going back to the day when they taught civics as part of a education in the public schools, and watching my parents, I will tell you that education is the key. Learning what the Constitution is, what it's about, what it does for you, what it does for others, is the best way for you to have an understanding and the best way for you to believe in the Constitution and want to live through it. When I grew up, there were 2 newspapers in almost every major city. One would say one thing, and the other paper would say the other thing in their editorial process, so you could learn and educate yourself. So education is the key to the Constitution surviving. And we have too many generations out there now who know very little about the Constitution. I had students come in as law students, and I knew more about the Constitution from my junior high school years than they knew when they walked in the door. And that's sad. And that's part of why people end up in silos for their information. It's all about education.
I agree, especially with that last comment about the silos. I mean, the importance of a civic education is when you hear things and when you have this array of information, how do you critically analyze it? I mean, let's say, for example, when the United States is in a conflict with Venezuelan drug dealers and we're using the 1798 Alien and Sedition Acts. Well, if you don't know what the Alien and Sedition Acts are, then it's kind of hard for you to tell if we should be able or we're allowed to use them that way. So the idea is the more information you have, that helps you contextualize, helps you judge what the news sources you're getting out there, whether they are giving you accurate information. So 100% civics education helps people sort of, there's weeds or there's a mountain of information, how to sort out what is important.
So he told me I couldn't answer this question, but I think I can. So I think just as important as civics education is media literacy. Because you can have all the civics education in the world, but if you don't know what to do with the information that you're processing on Twitter, on just normal CNN news media, then that civics education is useless. And so we have to be teaching ourselves and others to take a step back. And is this written with a slant? Is this written with an agenda in mind? Or do I need to go find a different source elsewhere to confirm what I just read? Where can I go to find more information about this thing and the laws that back what's happening? I think civics education goes hand in hand with that in today's society, because to your earlier point, we have information overload at our fingertips. I can wake up and I can be digesting information from the time that I open my eyes until the time I close them. And all of that civics education is for naught if I don't know how to process it.
Other questions?
So I went briefly to this research presentation on proselytizing speech by another professor, and I was curious about your thoughts on the media and how college campuses are being a target for proselytizing speech, and how I feel like the college campuses are basically a big target for that kind of like concept of like speech, and because they're the younger minds of this generation. So I just wanted to know your thoughts on more so of how college campuses are a target for a lot of this media stuff that's going on right now. Sorry, I was having trouble finding my words.
I'm afraid I don't know what proselytizing speech is. Can you talk about that?
Sorry. So there's this proselytizing speech is basically when someone comes onto campus, you know, and they kind of spew their rhetoric, and it's not necessarily backed or funded by the college at all, but it's like, you know, those preachers outside of like the college, not necessarily them, but people around that same scheme, where there's the protests, there's all of that. And I know that it's been a big issue on college campuses of people being kind of like taking over those college campuses. I just want to know your opinion on that standpoint.
I suppose I don't have an opinion. I don't know what the laws are or how that works First Amendment wise, what's allowed and what's not, because it's public. It is a public place, but also it can't be disruptive, right? So you're probably better than that.
So at its core, the freedom of speech means little if it doesn't mean the freedom of the person who thinks differently. That's a quote, bridging from a quote from Rosa Luxemburg. We have to have speech that we disagree with. The way you counteract the speech that you disagree with is to speak better thoughts. You win the day with arguments. It's recent, so we'll bring it up. You want to silence Charlie Kirk, you don't silence him with a bullet. You silence him by holding a rally at the same university a week later and having twice as many people show up. You silence him not through violence. You silence him by making better arguments, winning more people to your side, making him irrelevant to the point where nobody wants to hear him anymore because you've won the day, you've won the argument. College campuses will always be a bastion for people wanting to engage young minds, wanting to bring you over to their side for any number of reasons. When I was at the University of North Texas, one weekend we had this giant anti-abortion display. 2 weeks later, there was a fringe group that wanted to talk about legalizing cockfighting. Yeah, Denton, Texas, everybody. But there's groups out there that are going to want to engage with you because these are some formative years. You're also curious, hopefully, at this time. So I think it's important to expose yourself to all types of speech that's out there and understand, if you disagree with it, why? Why do you disagree with it? Just because you've always been told that and never heard differently? Think about it. Think about why you're hearing what you're hearing, and think about, does it reinforce what I believe, or does it give me 10 seconds to think, maybe I was wrong?
Great question. I appreciate the responses. Any other questions? Here, and then come to you.
Thomas Jefferson said that whenever the people are well informed, you can trust it with the government. Right now, one of the big issues we have is most people don't understand how to navigate government. But what is greater is the fact, and we're talking about civic education, things like housing, transportation, public works, and whatnot, is something that's simple to teach people because it's simple stuff. It's fundamental. It's what we deal with on a daily basis. But the biggest issue is that we're electing people, at state levels and federal levels that have never worked at the local level, so they don't even understand how we do business. And they make decisions without consulting with the people or coming back and talking to local elected officials, which is even more aggravating. So how do we empower people? Because a lot of cities have academies, government academies and such, but people are not getting interested. There's an apathy about government. How, in your view, do we get to people? Because back in the 1800s, 1787, there was an average of less than 300,000 people by colony or state, whatever. And people were much better informed than what we are now. So how do we get to people? How do we bring government to people so people make better elections of those who are going to represent?
Way to do that is to somehow depolarize the government as it is. Because when I would speak to my friends when I still worked on Capitol Hill, ones that didn't even want to vote, like what is turning you off of this? Like what is making you give up this right that my parents have spent so many years telling me was the greatest right in the world to be to vote? What is your aversion to being involved in that? And it was they felt as though it was hopeless, that there was so much animosity and there was so much infighting that they didn't want to be involved with something that was so negative. They didn't want to come home from their 9 to 5 and then have to inform themselves through media stations that are taking grabs at, like last night all over the news was Kash Patel going at it with Cory Booker. Like that is not something that somebody wants to just turn on and feel excited about the country that they're in. And I know it's a really large issue, and I don't know how we get to a point where we cool things down, but I think you would find people much more willing to get involved with grassroots campaigns that they believed in, or much more interested in picking up a news article at the end of the day if it wasn't so contentious all the time. And I really think that is like the root of the problem. People don't want to spend all day long dealing with the woes of their day and come home to more darkness. And that's really how politics can feel sometimes, I think, in today's day and age.
I know I tend to harp on this issue, and trust me, I've been told by a number of people we don't want to hear you talk about it anymore. But education is where it lies. Whether it's learning how to read and write, beyond reading the menu at McDonald's and how to count change, whether it is teaching people teaching your kids and anybody else to put down the media and put down the electronics, and God forbid you should read a book or read a newspaper. Absorb yourself into factual findings. As much as I love C-SPAN, I cannot sit there and watch the general sessions where people are speaking to an empty chamber so that their people in their district can just see them rant and rave about something that's important and get nothing done. But watching a real debate, that's worth watching. And when do they do it? During the day when everybody's out making a living. Maybe they should be on prime time. I think there is, I'd like to smile, you must agree with me. I think that it comes down to people wanting to know. And I don't know whether you start from the top and say, you got to stop yelling and screaming at people and calling people names, or from the bottom where we decide that we're going to educate our children to be able to understand and become good citizens. I don't know whether it's both or one, but that's what it comes down to.
All right, we have time for one last question. I think this young woman over here had her hand up.
So I know you mentioned earlier that in today's political climate, the U.S. Constitution would never be ratified. In your opinion, out of the original 10 bills in the Bills of Rights, which amendment do you think would be the most polarizing today in our political climate if the U.S. Constitution was being ratified today?
Can I take least polarizing? Come on, let me do least one. I got Third Amendment. Third Amendment. Ah, yes. Listen, the Third Amendment's the only thing keeping the 4th Infantry Division off your couch. Remember that. It's also the only one of the Bill of Rights that's never been a foundational case before the Supreme Court. So I think we're good on Third Amendment being least controversial. And that concludes my time.
The second, I mean, you look at those who believe that they couldn't exist without their ability to exercise the Second Amendment, and then you have others who have literally never picked up a gun in their life and can't imagine having a gun near them, who are looking at the travesties like the Charlie Kirk assassination last week, which, by the way, was followed up by a shooting in a Colorado public school. And so I think you have people who feel very, very, very strongly on both sides of that. And I do not think that that is one that either side would be willing to come off of in today's political climate to ratify.
Wow. I think the 10th Amendment would be one that is contentious, because it's the one that says any of the rights that are not enumerated herein are reserved to the states. And yet many of the things that the states believe in, the federal government has taken over. So I don't know whether that amendment was written quite the way it should have been, or maybe shouldn't have been written at all. But I think that that's probably one of the more contentious ones, the states' rights issues.
All right, with that being said, a fantastic question to end our conversation on. I want to thank everybody for being here today. I appreciate also not having to share my opinion on any of this. And I want to thank our esteemed panel for taking the time to be with us today to talk about the Constitution and these debates and the discussions and how it connects to our world today. So be sure to check out UCF's Public Policy Events website, which has a number of other events of a similar important and distinct nature. And of course, today's recording will also be shared for you as well. And I'll also encourage you to check out the Lou Fry Institute website and the Florida Joint Center for Citizenship. We have a number of resources, particularly for civics education, that you might find useful. So on behalf of my colleagues on the panel and Haley Winston, who helped bring this all together, thank you all so much for being here. And I know you're all college students, so there's free food in the back. All right? Thank you very much.